Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. Never mind him, my dear, said the Jew, winking at Mr. Dawkins and giving Master Bates a reproving tap with the nozzle of the bellows. Betsy's a fine girl. Stick up to her, Tom. Stick up to her. What I mean to say, Fagin, replied Mr. Chitling, very red in the face, is that it isn't anything to anybody here. No more it is, replied the Jew. Charlie will talk. Don't mind him, my dear. Don't mind him. Betsy's a fine girl. Do as she bids you, Tom, and you will make your fortune. So I do. Do as she bids me, replied Mr. Chitling. I shouldn't have been milled if it hadn't been for her advice. But it turned out a good job for you, didn't it, Fagin? And what's 6 weeks of it? It must come, some time or another. And why not in the winter time, when you don't want to go out a-walking so much, eh, Fagin? Ah, to be sure, my dear, replied the Jew. You wouldn't mind it again, Tom, would you? Asked the Dodger, winking upon Charlie and the Jew, if Bet was all right. I mean to say that I shouldn't, replied Tom angrily. There now, who'll say as much as that, I should like to know, eh, Fagin? Nobody, my dear, replied the Jew. Not a soul. I don't know one of 'em that would do it besides you. Not one of 'em, my dear. I might have got clear off. I'd split upon her, mightn't I, Fagin? Angrily pursued the poor half-witted dupe. A word from me would have done it, wouldn't it, Fagin? To be sure it would, my dear, replied the Jew. But I didn't blab it, did I, Fagin? Demanded Tom, pouring question upon question with great volubility. No, to be sure, replied the Jew. You were too stout-hearted for that. A deal too stout, my dear. Perhaps I was, rejoined Tom, looking round. And if I was, what's to laugh at in that, eh, Fagin? The Jew, perceiving that Mr. Chitling was considerably roused, hastened to assure him that nobody was laughing, and to prove the gravity of the company, appealed to Master Bates, the principal offender. But, unfortunately, Charlie, in opening his mouth to reply that he was never more serious in his life, was unable to prevent the escape of such a violent roar, that the abused Mr. Chitling, without any preliminary ceremonies, rushed across the room and aimed a blow at the offender, who, being skillful in evading pursuit, ducked to avoid it, and chose his time so well that it lighted on the chest of the merry old gentleman, and caused him to stagger to the wall, where he stood panting for his breath, while Mr. Chitling looked on in intense dismay. Hark! Cried the Dodger at this moment. I heard the tingler. Catching up the light. He crept softly upstairs. The bell was rung again, with some impatience, while the party were in darkness. After a short pause, the Dodger reappeared, and whispered Fagin mysteriously. What? Cried the Jew. Alone? The Dodger nodded in the affirmative, and shading the flame of the candle with his hand, gave Charlie Bates a private intimation in dumb show that he had better not be funny just then. Having performed this friendly office, he fixed his eyes on the Jew's face and awaited his directions. The old man bit his yellow fingers and meditated for some seconds, his face working with agitation the while, as if he dreaded something and feared to know the worst. At length he raised his head. "Where is he?" he asked. The Dodger pointed to the floor above and made a gesture as if to leave the room. "Yes," said the Jew, answering the mute inquiry. "Bring him down. Hush, quiet, Charlie. Gently, Thomas. Scarce. The brief direction to Charlie Bates and his recent antagonist was softly and immediately obeyed. There was no sound of their whereabout when the Dodger descended the stairs, bearing the light in his hand, and followed by a man in a coarse smock frock, who, after casting a hurried glance round the room, pulled off a large wrapper which had concealed the lower portion of his face and disclosed, all haggard, unwashed, and unshorn, the features of Flash Toby Crackit. "How are you, Faggy?" said this worthy, nodding to the Jew. "Pop that shawl away in my castor, Dodger, so that I may know where to find it when I cut. That's the time of day. You'll be a fine young cracksman afore the old file now." With these words he pulled up the smock frock and, winding it round his middle, drew a chair to the fire and placed his feet upon the hob. "See there, Fuegi," he said, pointing disconsolately to his top boots. "Not a drop of day in Martin since you know when. Not a bubble of blacking, by Jove. But don't look at me in that way, man. All in good time. I can't talk about business till I've eat and drank. So produce the sustenance, and let's have a quiet fill-out for the first time these 3 days." The Jew motioned to the Dodger to place what eatables there were upon the table, and seating himself opposite the housebreaker, waited his leisure. To judge from appearances, Toby was by no means in a hurry to open the conversation. At first, the Jew contented himself with patiently watching his countenance, as if to gain from its expression some clue to the intelligence he brought, but in vain. He looked tired and worn, but there was some complacent repose upon his features that they always wore, and through dirt and beard and whisker there were still shown, unimpaired, the self-satisfied smirk of Flash Toby Crackit. Then the Jew, in an agony of impatience, watched every morsel he put into his mouth, pacing up and down the room. Meanwhile, in irrepressible excitement, it was all of no use. Toby continued to eat with the utmost outward indifference until he could eat no more. Then, ordering the Dodger out, he closed the door, mixed a glass of spirits and water, and composed himself for talking. "First and foremost, Fuegi," said Toby. Yes, interposed the Jew, drawing up his chair. Mr. Crackit stopped to take a draught of spirits and water, and to declare that gin was excellent. Then, placing his feet against the low mantelpiece, so as to bring his boots about the level of his eye, he quietly resumed. "And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy. please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again